It's a great honor and a privilege to introduce Dr. Rose Lerer Cohen. We're here in your beautiful home in Renana in Israel. And Rose, you are passionate and your knowledge on Lithuania is so extensive. So it is such an honor to have you speak about your roots and what made you so interested in the subject.
Okay, we'll start from the beginning. What made me interested in the subject is that for years when we were growing up in South Africa, these two pictures were on our sideboard in Cape Town, and we ate dinner with them every evening, and we didn't ask many questions, which we should have. And these people, in the end, I discovered, are my grandmother, my father's sister, actually two of his sisters. What happened was, and why I became interested in Lithuania itself, was that on the first yahrzeit of my father, we were at the cemetery and we looked at the tombstone, and it says that here lies Lerer, born in Ujventis, and he's the son of Rose or Reza and Benjamin Lerer. And then at the foot of the tombstone, we put in memory of his parents, brothers and sisters who were murdered in the Shoah. And as I looked at the tombstone, I thought to myself, okay, I'm Reza, my brother Bernard Benjamin is there, and Aryeh Leib, our son, was just 3 months old when my father passed away. So it was I thought to myself, okay, fine, we're carrying on names, we carry on tradition, but we don't really know who these people are, and that's when I began my search. My first visit to Lithuania was in 1991, and that's really when the passion began. But let's go back to Ujventis. So my father was born in 1909 in Ujventis. He is the son of Reza and Benjamin Lerer. My grandmother's maiden name was Zvik. He had a brother called Abelus, and there were the other children who I'll tell you about as we go along. So my father came to South Africa in 1929. He joined his brother, who'd been there since in 1924, and they worked together and progressed, and like all South Africans, made a living and had their children and lived in South Africa. Now, just to tell you about the family in Lithuania. As I said, I didn't know much about the family. I discovered, as I was doing my research, that my father's sister, Malka, had a daughter, and she was married to a man by the name of Nachum Ginkas, or Finka, which would be today. The way that I found out about her was that I'd heard during the time that I was interviewing people over the years that she was in the Shavli ghetto. And this is a book that's the list of the Jews in the Shavli ghetto. So what I did was, I knew Ujventis, so I took a ruler and I sat down and I went through the book, and I eventually found my aunt on page 492, and it says here Ginkas Nochamas, which is Ginkas Nachum, who was her husband, who was born in Shavli in 1910. Then we have Malka, who was born in Ujventis in 1912. And then we have Miriam, their daughter, who was born on the 5th of June, 1941. That's a very ominous date, because after Operation Barbarossa, when the Lithuanians when the Germans attacked Lithuania, was 2 weeks later. And I don't know what happened to my aunt, my cousin Miriam, my first cousin Miriam. I also don't know what happened to Auntie Malka, because I was told that she was sent to Ravensbrück. I've looked for her in Ravensbrück, I've looked for her all over, and I haven't been able to find the fate of her or her husband or her daughter. The interesting thing about Malka was that in my search in the archives, I actually found that she was interested in coming to Israel, because in 1934 she joined a hachshara in Gruzd and preparing to come to Israel. And here it says, Lerer, Malka, Ujventis. She was 20 in 1934, and she claimed that she was a cook. So that's the fate of Malka. Then we have Tzila. I don't have a picture of Tzila. I don't know what she looks like. I only know her by name. But Tzila was married to, also from the archival research that I've done, Tzila was married to Yechiel Ulshrang. They had, not sure whether it was 4 or 5 children. And the dates for me are always ominous, because there was Lezer, who was born in 1933. There was Itta Rivka in 1935. Miriam in 1938, and Hinda Bela in 1937. Ominous about this is because they were very young when they were murdered. And so that is the fate of Tzila. There was another brother, Hirsch. I didn't have any pictures of my family, and my cousins in South Africa actually gave me pictures that they had. They didn't give me the originals. They gave me Xeroxes. So we have Uncle Hirsch, who was my brother, my father's brother, and that was my grandfather, Benjamin. Hirsch was a member of the Komsomol. That's the young communists in Lithuania. He was very well known and very active, and I believe that there was a picture of him in the school in Ujventis until Lithuanian independence in 1991. And then there was another sister. Her name was Paya, or she called herself Paulina. This is Paulina. Paulina converted to Christianity in 1926, and she survived the war as a Christian in Lithuania, is buried in the cemetery in Ujventis, and through her whole life she was a practicing Christian. Now the interesting thing about the Holocaust in Ujventis is that, I should have perhaps said this in the beginning, that since 1991, when I began my passion, I've been visiting Lithuania almost every year. And on my second visit, I met a woman by the name of Miriam Yavne. We corresponded, we spoke, and Miriam gave me a list of the Jews in Ujventis who were murdered. This is a copy of the list. It's a 3-page list. It was done by the NKVD after the war. Getting the list was a little bit of a shock to me, because I saw the names of my family. But seeing the name of your family is one thing, but when you see your name, which is like Lerer, which is a woman in Lithuanian, you say Lerer Reza, and say, oops, that's me. And you see Lerer's Benjamin, you see that's who my brother is named after, and it suddenly makes it all very real. what was fascinating for me, or interesting to me, in this list when I got it, is that it's divided into two. And on the second part of the list, there is a list of names of 5 or about 8 people. I see that I didn't have a copy over here. And I could not understand how, if there were 99 Jews in Lithuania, why you needed to kill them twice. Surely you could have done it all in one day. And when I looked at the list more carefully, I saw that there were 2 killings. The first killing took place in July, and the second one in December. And over the years, the research that I did, I discovered that Sila and her children were hiding in a monastery and in a place called Lubeni, and from there, not in Lubeni, it's in a monastery about 5 kilometers from Ushventis, and then they were moved to this town called Lubeni, and they were hidden in the house of a man by the name of Pelashkas. I have no idea what happened there, but they were eventually given up with other members of other members of the family who were also in hiding with them, and they were shot into the same pit as the rest of the family. The shooting took place in the Pashilba forest, which is 3 kilometers out of Ushventis. I haven't yet been able to establish whether they walked there, whether they were taken there by horse and cart, or how they got there. But they were, like the rest of the Jews of Lithuania, shot into a pit, and that is where they met their end. Another thing that I want to tell about the Holocaust, about Lithuania, about Ushventis, and that is that in 1955, I was told by a survivor called Rachel Katsav that the graves were pillaged because the locals thought that the people were buried with their valuables. So in 1955, part of the bodies were moved to the cemetery in Vilna, and in the cemetery in Vilna there's a mass grave to the Jews of Ushventis. And this is a picture that Rachel Katsav gave me when I met her here in Israel. This is the picture of the graves of the mass grave, and this is a picture of me in 1992 at the mass grave. I just want to get back now to the Pashilba forest where the people where my family was murdered, with the rest of the Jews of Ushventis. In 1991, when I went on my first visit, I thought that I was going to discover things about my family. That was why I went to Lithuania. I didn't quite grasp the whole history, or I wasn't aware of the history. I wasn't aware of the way people were murdered. I wasn't aware of anything because I didn't know about the Holocaust in Lithuania. So in 1991, Paulina was still alive, and I went to visit her together with our daughter, who was 14 then, and she told me about the family, the information that I've given you right now, which is that the names of her siblings, and where everybody was murdered. She also told me, what the occupation was. Her father was a glazier, her mother was a housewife, and they lived in Lithuania as I described earlier. And then after we had some tea, after we had spoken, and one of the things that she did say was that my father saved her life. Now, I wasn't sure that my father had in contact with her. In fact, I was convinced that he hadn't. And then I realized afterwards, when I thought about it again, that he had contact with her. How he discovered that she was alive, I have no idea. I used to go together with my father to the shop in the Jewish bookshop in Cape Town called Bank and Stad. And I used to go with my father, and we used to pack a box of clothes, of medicines, of different things into these boxes. And before the advent of the Iron Curtain, you could send your family presents from South Africa or wherever, anywhere else. And Paulina told me that she'd sold these things, and this is how she was able to live. And in fact, somehow my father had saved her. And then, after she told me how pleased she was to see me, and that it was an honor for her to meet her brother's daughter and granddaughter, and now we were going to go down to the forest. I might sound naive, but I had no idea of what she was talking about. And we went down to the forest, and we went to the mass grave. This is how it looked. On the 26th of the 4th, 1991, this is the mass grave in the Pashilva forest in Užventis. And part of it also, there was a fence around the grave, and this is the gravestone, and this is in the days of when it was still Russia, so it says nothing about the Jews. It just says that Russian citizens were murdered in this place. And just to show you how things changed was when I went 3 years later, this is how it looked. And today it looks completely different because it's cleaned up with a fence, and there's also a new monument that children of the survivors put up. During my visit in 1991, Auntie Paulina took me to the house where my father was born. It isn't standing anymore. And I also met my cousins, whom I didn't know about previously, Leonis and Zamy Zwick. They still live in Užventis today. They are my father's first cousins. In fact, so their father, Elliot Zwick, and they're my second cousin, sorry. My father's mother, sorry, and their father was sister and brother. And when I go to Lithuania, still go and visit my cousins in Užventis, because that's one of the things that you have to do.
Rose, can I just ask you?
Yeah.
Did your father never ever tell you about his family?
Okay, I was going to add now. Everything that I'm telling you now, I had absolutely no idea whatsoever. Every bit of information that I've given you about my family is what I've discovered through years of archival research. And it's been an honor for me to be able to actually give them life, because it's people who were murdered and now they have life. No, not a word.
Did you ever ask, or he never?
No, we didn't ask, Les, because none of us asked in South Africa, because we were busy doing other things. And also, they also wouldn't have told us because they didn't want to burden us with a difficult past. So why? Just move on. And we did, all of us. I think that if you interview or speak to many South Africans, there are very few whose parents actually shared an experience. And in fact, I was thinking about it a few days ago. We lived in Paro. I was born in Paro in Cape Town. And when I think about the Paro Shul and the people who were there, I'm sure that 90% of the people who were in the shul came from Lithuania, and they all had their little story. And if I decided today to research each of these families, I probably would find that most of them got onto the boat and came to South Africa and left behind lots of memories, lots of things, and many families who were killed in the Shoah in Lithuania.
Can I just ask just one last thing?
As many as you want.
When you went to the forest, and when your aunt told her what had happened there, what was your reaction?
It was a reaction of shock, because, and also I was at the beginning of my research, so I didn't quite. I understood that people had been shot, but I should have prepared before. I should have understood where I was going to and what I was doing, but I didn't do that. And I think when I came home, I wanted to throw away my shoes because I'd been in this forest and I'd been to all these places, and I sort of like wasn't sure what I've done and sort of where I'd been, and it was a shock to me when I eventually started to do the research and understand what had happened and how these people had been murdered. And sometimes on Yom HaShoah, when I stand for that minute and I think about them, one of the thoughts that crosses my mind is that how do you stand at the foot, sort of the precipice kind of a pit, and know that somebody's going to shoot you and your family? Like I said to myself, were they dressed? Were they undressed? Did they strip them? Did they what they do? What they leave? And these are the thoughts that go through my mind, and that's the reality of it. And if I can just say now how I sometimes I feel that my father wasn't a Holocaust survivor, but I think he, like many other Jews who came to South Africa at his age, at the age of 21, and left behind families, could be regarded as Holocaust survivors once removed.
Yeah.
And I think that, if one could coin a phrase now, I feel like a Holocaust survivor once removed. We grew up, many of us, not only me, in a house where people didn't speak, where we were a little different, because we had parents who had accents, and who were carrying some baggage, but you never knew what the baggage was. And sometimes when I think about it, we many of us whose parents came to South Africa or came anywhere else, it can be Australia, anywhere else in the whole world, we're like orphaned Holocaust, the second generation Holocaust survivors, because many of us, as I said just a second ago, experienced the same silence, the same not sharing, and a lot of the etchonot, what is that in English? A lot of the attitudes or our understandings were very similar to Holocaust survivors, and it's for me it was a very interesting concept. So basically, which I sort of started forth in the beginning, what happened was in Uzventis is that the Jews of Uzventis were shot into the pit in the Silver Forest, and they were all murdered. I think there were 3 survivors.
Do we know if it was the Lithuanians that did the shooting, or?
I don't know, Les. I've done research. There were Lithuanian helpers. The person who was responsible for the killing in that area was called Koloshka. He was a lawyer. I believe that he ran away after the war, and nobody knows where he is. And also, if you look at the list, at the bottom of the list over here in Lithuanian, it gives the names of the people who assisted on this list.
Who assisted in the killing?
Yes. So I mean, one knows who the killers were, but I think that in the research that I'm doing, it's not a path that I want to go down. And I prefer to concentrate on my research, but I know the names. And that's the story about Užventis and my family. My mother, on the other hand, she and her family, her father was in South Africa for about 6 years before the family came. And then my grandmother came with her children on the boat in 1931, and they came to South Africa. They were in Johannesburg, and then they were in Mafeking, and then they were back in Johannesburg. My grandfather was a reverend in Mafeking. So the immediate family wasn't murdered in Lithuania.
Which town did they come from?
They came from the town they were from Plunian, well-known town in Lithuania. I believe that people are doing research on the town of Plunian. My mother went to school in Plunian, and here is her report card that I found. It says here, Geographia. So here's a list of her marks of the class. And this is her studies as in geography. The sad thing is that one looks at this list, probably 90% of the people on this list were murdered, and that is, as I said, the very unfortunate part about lists of this nature. And so this was my mother at school, and in South Africa she was a housewife like the rest of South African ladies. And another thing that I just want to say about my mother's family and in Plunian, there was a story about the girls, or my mother told me a story about the girls in Plunian, and that there was a group of them that were raped and then murdered. And it was a story that I thought about for a while, and then you take things and you put them into a little compartment, and then you bring them out every now and then. And a number of years ago, I met Glenda and Abel Levitt, who are doing a lot of work about Plunian, and I said, you know what? I said, my mother always told me the story about the girls in Plunian who were Uncle Art's 6 sisters, and they were shot into the pit after being raped and murdered. And Glenda Levitt said to me, she said, you know, I've got a list of the names. And she sent me a list of the names, and there were the Kessel sisters on that list. It's just as astounding to me again to see the names of people who had been spoken about on this list, and also to sort of connect this all together. And then when I thought about Uncle Artsik, I sort of like wondered, you know, sort of here was this man whom we used to go and visit on a Sunday afternoon. What was he carrying? He didn't tell anybody. And you suddenly make a connection between these girls, Uncle Artsik, who you remember, and the list, and the lives before, and the lives after, and the lives lost, and it all becomes like a very complicated issue. But as I said, all these things, the things that I didn't know before, I've discovered them as I've gone along. I just want to talk a little bit about my father and his experiences, because I think that it portrays South African Jewry in a way. So my father came to South Africa in 1929. This is part of a picture of a ship manifest. Well, maybe this is a better picture. So this is what the ship manifest looks like. And it says on it, Lerer labor, his male, 21, he was born in Oostvent. Now you couldn't come to South Africa unless you had a sponsor. So the sponsor was Mrs. Swick, and she lived in 49 Roland Street. So Mr. Zwick and my grandmother were brother and sister. So basically he came to his aunt, who sponsored him. He lived in South Africa. He lived in Durbanville for a while. And Uncle Abe, who he joined, also lived in Durbanville. And we lived in Parow, and he lived in Durbanville. And that's where we grew up and spent a lot of our time in our youth. My father joined the army as part of the South African Jews in World War II. But I have to go back because I forgot something very important. In Lithuania, before my father came to South Africa, he studied in the Tels Yeshiva. You should have reminded me, Les.
You're right.
Anyway, and this is a picture of my father's class in the Tels Yeshiva. I can't work out who he is because they're all wearing hats and look like...
Just, Rose, if you can, I'm just going to... Because this is a very, very, very important picture. To be in the Tels Yeshiva,
yeah.
You know, they took the cream of the... They took the top students.
So my father was a student in the Tels Yeshiva from the age of 11 until 21, until he left to go to Lithuania.
He left Lithuania to come to South Africa.
And to go to South Africa. Now, when I started to do my research, I contacted various people whom I thought might have known my father in the Tels Yeshiva. One of the people that I visited was Rav Shlapabersky, who lived in Geula. And I went to see him. I can't remember how I got hold of him. And he told me that there was a man in Mattersdorf. His name was Reb Chaim Shmuel Lopian. And maybe he knew my father. He wasn't sure. Now, what was interesting about the visit to Rav Shlapabersky was that he had to phone Rav Lopian in order to tell him that I am making an appointment. He went to the closet, he took out the phone. He plugged in the phone, phoned his friend, made the arrangement. He finished the call, he took the phone, took it out of the plug and put it back into the cupboard. And I said to him, "What are you doing?" He says, "That's Bittelzman."
Wow, that's like a waste of time for those.
He says, "Talking on the phone is a waste of time. You only use it when you need it." Anyway, so he made the appointment with Reb Chaim Shmuel, and I went to see him. And Reb Chaim Shmuel's house he was living in an apartment in Mattersdorf. So Ronnie and myself, my husband, we came in. We walked into this apartment, and we walked into this room. It was heaving with books. It's the only way to describe it. There wasn't an empty wall. There were just books all over. And he started to tell me about it. He said, "Do you know my father?" I said, "Sure, I know your father." He said, "My father was this," and told me what kind of a student he was, and where he and this and that. And he said, "You know," he says to me, "I've got a picture for you." I said, "Got a picture for me?" "Okay, fine, you've got a picture for me." He says, "Call me tomorrow morning because I'm going to look for the picture." So after hearing all about my father and what kind of student he was, and he was quite upset, Rav Lopian, that my father didn't continue his studies because it seems that he was quite a good student. He said, "I found the picture. You can come and get the picture." So I went to Mattersdorf. This is in 1994, about. I went to get the picture. He said, "Here, take the picture." This is the picture.
I'm going to just zoom in. It's amazing that he had the picture.
Yeah. At the back of the picture, I'll read it to you in a minute. The back of the picture says, Lemaskeret Netzer. You said, it's a memorial you should ever remember. Lechaveri Yakiri, to my dear friend. Marchaim Shmuel Lopian. Mimeni, from me. Leib Lerer. Yom Hei, Parshat Korach, Shnat Tarpat.
Tarpat, that was 1929.
That's 929. So just before my father left for South Africa, he doesn't look anything like a yeshiva bocher here. Gave Harav Lopian the picture, and Harav Lopian kept the picture and then when I actually phoned Reb Chaim Shmuel, I said to him, listen, I'm done with the picture, you can have it back. He says, no, it's yours. And he gave it to me, and I've had it ever since. The interesting thing is that we know from this that my father left for South Africa soon after Parshat Korach in 1929. It was very interesting talking to Reb Chaim Shmuel, and it lands up that him and Reb Chaim Shmuel were chevruta, and Reb Chaim Shmuel Lopian became one of the Rosh Yeshiva in Gameshead.
One of the great Gedolei Hador.
Exactly. And so that's my story.
They were chevruta.
They were chevruta.
So Rose, I have to ask you, your father's family, were they very, very from religious family?
I don't think so. I don't know. I have absolutely no idea. But I know that when my father was 11, he went to Telz, and he was in the Telz Yeshiva, as I said before, from 11 until the age of 21 when he came to South Africa.
And when he came to South Africa, did he remain from? Did he still study a little bit?
I don't remember him studying, but I know that when in Paro, if they needed a Balkora, if they needed something, then my father could do it, at the drop of a hat.
And Shabbos he went to shul.
Shabbos he went to shul, and we were one of the few Shomer Shabbos families, in Cape Town. I think at that point we grew up in a Shomer Shabbat household. My her father was a reverend, and so she also came from a home that was religious. It was an interesting experience in Cape Town, growing up in a Shomer Shabbat household.
Because there weren't that many.
No, they weren't.
Even to this very day, there aren't that many.
No, there weren't that many, and it wasn't an easy experience as a child growing up in a house that was. But it was okay. We managed. It was different. But it wasn't easy from the point of view of because your friends did other things on Shabbos, things that you didn't do on Shabbos. I remember I used to go and visit Rabbi Lipschitz. He was a rabbi in Paro. I used to go and visit him also on a Shabbos afternoon and spend time with him because there was a common bond of Shomer Shabbos.
Did your father ever give shiurim?
No, nothing. Never gave shiurim. Never did anything. He was he had his yeshiva education.
And he never told you that he was a Telz?
He told us we knew that he was in Telz.
You did know?
Yeah, we knew that he was in Telz. We didn't know much else, but we knew.
And did he keep in touch with other Telz yeshiva bachers?
No, he didn't. No, maybe he did. You know what? I was just saying no, but I mean I don't.
Because I had an uncle who was in Telz. I had patients who were in Telz as well. From the original Telz in Johannesburg.
In Johannesburg, I don't know. I don't think so. Also, it depends on when they came to South Africa.
Yeah. Also true.
Yeah, because here in Israel, I looked for students who might have known him, and I couldn't find. So maybe in Johannesburg there were, but we, as I said, to this day we won't know when they came to South Africa. But that was also interesting to me, and I think that us who grew up in South Africa, I don't think we give enough thought to that generation, because many of those generation were probably people who studied in yeshivot. And they came to South Africa and became, different people. Because they didn't, they'd studied, they knew, but they had to get on with their lives.
They had to earn a living.
They had to earn a living, and so that was sort of the way they earned their living. And moved on ahead. You could keep your education that you got in those days to guide you and to give you guidelines on how one should behave, and but to be a religious person, or was very difficult, because you had to work on Shabbat. So I mean, that's the way it was. It's a reality that we all grew up with.
Wow.
It was different. It was interesting. Anyway, so to get back to my father, so my father enlisted into the South African forces and fought against Rommel in the desert. And this is his record of service when he enlisted and all about him. And it says here that he was, his number, his name, he was in the South African Tank Corps, or the Desert Rats, his date of birth, and he joined the army in the 15th of June 1940 and was discharged on the 16th of August 1945. He was awarded the Star of South Africa, the military medal.
Award.
He was the military medal, and he was mentioned in dispatches. The interesting thing is that, this is a picture of my father during the war with some of his friends. It says here that on this is the 12th of the 8th, 1942. I contacted some of these people, but they didn't give me much information about him. But one gentleman did, and he told me that my father was a very good soldier, and he spoke German, so you could understand those things about German. Didn't speak a word of German, he only spoke Yiddish. The reason why my father was awarded the military medal was because this is his attestation, whatever it's called. This is from a book. It's called South African Jews in World War II. It was published by the Board of Deputies in 1955. I've spoken to a number of people. It doesn't seem to have a full list of all people who served, but it mentions people who were wounded, it mentions people who were awarded medals, and my father was awarded the military medal because I have to take some time and read this to you.
Oh, please.
Another desert rat, Corporal Lerer, gained the military medal at a time when the 8th Army was reeling back towards El Alamein. We were on patrol, wrote Corporal Lerer afterwards, when a German column broke through our lines near Mezamaruth. We lay dogger and remained behind. In the morning, we found 2 enemy 50mm guns about 1.5 miles away from the main columns. We held our fire because that would have attracted the Huns. We charged up, and I stood on the running board of a car. At pistol point, we captured the guns. We then made a wide detour and succeeded in rejoining our comrades. Now, among the other adventures, Lerer took a leading part in his rescuing 26 men and 1 officer taken prisoners by Germans. He was in charge of an armed car, which was attached to the rear guard holding off the German advances near Maus, south of Benghazi. Across country, he encountered a pair of enemy lorries laden with British prisoners of war and guarded by 4 of Rommel's men. One of the enemy vehicles had broken down, and the other lorry was towing it. Lerer gave chase single-handedly and not only stopped the procession, but took 4 German guards prisoner amid the cheers of the captives. So that was for which my father was awarded the military medal. Many South African Jews fought in World War II, and I think that some of those who fought in the war and came back had a bit of animosity towards those who didn't, because those who didn't were able to move ahead financially, and those who did had to start afterwards. I think that there's a lot of South African history also that is overlooked, and a lot of South African history that us as the children of South Africans didn't pay attention to. We grew up in a place where we had everything and given everything, and we didn't really have time to, or the inclination to ask. And there's a lot of things and a lot of history that we unfortunately just missed out and got left behind. I just want to say a few words about what this experience has done for me. And that is that I have been researching Lithuania, a wide knowledge of Lithuania, of the Holocaust in Lithuania. One of the things that I did do was, together with my friend Saul Isroff, I just need to find chapter 1. Hold on a moment. Sorry, Les, this is not the way. This is volume 3. One moment. Okay. So, this was a book that I did together with my friend Saul Isroff, as I said previously. We did it many years ago. It was published by Geffen in 2002, I think. What we did was we collected as many lists of names of Jews that were murdered in the Shoah in Lithuania. I spent a lot of time in the archives in the Bundesarchiv in Germany. I spent a lot of time in the archives in Lithuania and in Yad Vashem, and we put together these lists. Now, 2002, nobody had done this before, and I think we were pioneers in the work that we did. The beginning of the book has some about the history of Lithuania, and obviously there's much more that one can find today. We also, I actually wrote letters to people, survivors, and asked them to send in lists. And many survivors sent in lists of their families that were murdered. And then we also had emails that we sent out, because things changed. History progressed, and you could send things out by email and not by mail. So in the book, what we did was, we have here the mail and email submissions. So this is how the names look. And then we also have different sources, but at the end of the book there is there's a surname index. So every single name that appears in the book appears in the index, so you can find the names in the book. The names were given to Yad Vashem and to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, so they do now appear in their databases, and it's referred to as the Lithuanian Names Project. And this is what we did for years, and eventually we published. There are 4 volumes, as you can see over here. These are the 4 volumes. Oops.
And Rose, did Yad Vashem and the Holocaust Museum in Washington, did they help you with the list?
No, this was a totally private project. We did this on our own. we went to the archives on our own. We travelled and we didn't. So as I was saying previously, this is a totally private project, which Saul and myself did on our own. The foreword in the book is written by Dr. Stephen Smith, whom Saul knew quite well. And Stephen and his brother, actually, Dr. Stephen Smith and his brother, began a Holocaust museum in Birmingham, and since then they've done astounding work relating to the Shoah. I just want to read part of the foreword that Stephen writes. He wrote that this book has not been written under normal circumstances of historiography, and the published material about the destruction is mostly the work of untrained and inexperienced writers. The various memoirs, descriptions and notes, evidence and documents were sent in by persons scattered all over many countries. It was therefore difficult to synchronize the dates and the names clearly establish the facts and happenings with an exactitude. And it makes it quite clear the reason for this is that Chelm is annihilated and gone. The houses are empty without a Jewish soul, and the very streets have become a Jewish cemetery, saturated with the blood of Jews of martyrs who have bequeathed a silent will. When we are led to the slaughter, many of our souls remain. I think that is the essence of the book, and I think that is what inspired us to do it. And we were untrained, and we just did this because of a passion. And the letters that people wrote me to thank me for the work that I did were quite astounding, in fact. And I donated a lot of the material that's relating to the book to Yad Vashem. I just want to close the circle before we end. 2 years ago, I went with my son Ari to the 70th anniversary of the commemorating the Jews of the murder of the Jews of Uzvent. There was a survivor there whom I hadn't met before. It was in the Pashilva forest. It was Ari's first visit to Lithuania, and we went to Telz, to Ponevezh, and to all the famous places. And my friend Shlomit, who lived Ginosar from Jerusalem, joined us on the trip. And we also went to her town, and we went to remember her family that was murdered in the Shoah. And going with Ari was a very interesting experience, because this was his first experience with the Shoah. He hadn't been on any of the trips to Germany or the Mitzad HaChaim organized by the school. And he was moved by the fact that the family had been murdered in the Shoah. He was moved more when he saw the mass grave, and also when he came to the cemetery in Vilna. It was also something that, sort of, you could see the cemetery, you could see that there was a mass grave, you could see that people had been moved there. There was a stone which signifies, of the fact that death and people were buried there, and as the people were in a cemetery. But when we went to Ponar, which is where the Jews of Vilna were murdered, this is one of the places that really made a huge impression on him. And he wrote a poem, and I think that I just want to end the interview with this. He wrote, in fact, he left Ponar, and he left Shlomit and myself in Ponar, and he went to the car, and he found a piece of paper and a pen in the car, and these are the words that he wrote. He wrote, I'll read it in Hebrew, and then I'll read it in English. בתוך בורות של זיכרון, הדמעות צפות והגרון חנוק, תחושה של מראה של ניצחון, יחד עם הרגשה של הפסד ואיפוק. חלום בלהות שנראה כה אמיתי, הרגש חי ובועט, רואה את הקבר, בבטן הוא אינו, המוות בתוכו צועק. העבר הנורא יצר עתיד מוזר, ערבוב של שמחה ועצב. לפעמים הוא מוכר, לרוב הוא זר. הצחוק והבכי קובעים את הקצב. I'll just read the translation into English, and this is what I rewrote. Within the pits of memory, tears surge forth. Throat is choked. A bitter sense of triumph, along with a feeling of loss and restraint. A nightmare that seems so real. Emotions abound. See the pit. The gut cannot grasp. Death shouts out. The unfathomable past creates a strange future, mingling joy and sadness, occasionally familiar, mostly foreign. Laughter and tears set the pace. It was written by Ari Cohen, our son.
Rose, I must just tell you that there are no words. There really are no words. Not only are you a pioneer, I think you are like one of the greatest experts on Lithuanian Jewry. What you did here, and I'm very fortunate that I have the first volume of this book, is a mammoth task. And you did it voluntary with a passion, with Saul Izaroff and to read Stephen Smith's introduction. It is just absolute unbelievable what you did. And it is such an honor and a privilege to have heard you tonight. And I'm in awe, I really am. And it's just been, there are no words really. And you must just continue in your research, and you are one of the tremendous scholars that we have, and you have such a passion and a connection to Lithuania, and we are so grateful. And thank you so much for sharing your family, your incredible family's history with us.
It's my pleasure. I'm happy to do so.